Geraldine. The northbound express clattered on. I dozed and remembered that early adventure in Canada. Then my semi-dream moved on to the times I shared with my first wife, Geraldine. After my first excursion to the railhead in 1855, then my perambulations around Upper Canada, it was the penultimate day of June before I got back to Montreal. Adam and I had, after walking the right-of-way to Toronto, worked our way back along the line to Kingston, from which we followed the Rideau Canal to Ottawa. We walked the Bytown to Prescott route, but took the train back to Ottawa again, where Joseph had telegraphed he would meet us. Ottawa was then a burgeoning settlement on the Ottawa River, at the junction with the Rideau River and the canal, but I doubt that anyone seriously thought at that time it would be chosen for the capital of a new country. In any event, Joseph, Adam, and I took the steamboat, train, and steamboat journey from there to Montreal together, after which Adam was to go home to his family near Cornwall for a few days. Mem Dubé welcomed Joseph and I warmly and told us she would heat water so we could each take a bath and she could wash our clothes. There would be a modest extra charge for these services, but Mem Dubé would, I soon learned, in large measure repay her gain from our absence at meals when we were away with small treats such as biscuits or buns and generous allowances of water for bathing. There were letters Mem Dubé had placed upon my bed. My room had a locked door, which was a good thing for someone away so much. However, my general state of cleanliness, even though I had bathed when possible, which was less often than I would like, meant that I did not read these letters until after I had bathed. When I looked at them, I saw from the writing that the first was from my parents, so I opened the second, upon which I did not recognize the hand. It was from Geraldine and was quite short. I had written her from Brockville, outlining what I was going to be doing and forecasting I would be home before the 1st of July. Her note, for that is all it was, invited 44 me to dinner on that day, being a Sunday, assuming I was back. I would send a note in the morning giving my assent. I then read the letter from my parents. There was a lot of family news and questions about Canada that I would have to answer. I thought I would write that evening, but after dinner, as I sat down to write, I found I was ready for my bed and did not wake until morning. While Joseph, Adam, and I would normally work on a Saturday, at least for the morning, we were excused on account of our time away. After breakfast, I wrote the note for Geraldine, then put on my walking shoes and a fairly light jacket that I could carry and walked to the address I had for her. I simply put the note in the letter slot. However, the door then opened, and it was Geraldine herself. "Oh, it is you, Richard. Did you not think to knock? I was concerned your uncle and aunt would consider it inappropriate for me to call when I was invited to dinner tomorrow." "Yes, I suppose that might be the case. At this moment, they have gone to shop for some new furniture. Let me look at your letter. It simply accepts the invitation. Good, but if you are not at work today, are you at liberty to share some time with me so that we may talk of what we have been doing since our arrival? That would please me, and no doubt there are things to be said that may not be for the ears of your uncle and aunt." "Precisely. Since it could be looked upon badly for me to come with you now, shall we agree you will collect me at 1:15 for a walk in the oldest part of the city?" "Certainly. I will return then. If our conversation seems perfunctory, you must note that I was standing in front of the door of the house, and we were open to public observation. However, I was most pleased that Geraldine wished to converse with me in confidence, though of course our walk would be entirely public, even if our discourse was not audible. Thus I walked, as had been my intention, up the hill called Mont Royal, which gives the city its name. From there I had a good view over the southern arm of the St. Lawrence as it passes the island upon which the city is set. I could see why it was a grand location for transport by water, at least when things were not frozen. That was something I had yet to experience. But for the moment I could see why the location was also a nightmare for a railway engineer, of which I was now one. There was only in the past year a bridge over the western point of the island towards Vaudreuil and Dorian. That was a considerable 45 working, but the bridge to the east was the one that would challenge us for the next few years. I timed my walk so that I could return to collect Geraldine at the agreed time. We walked into the older part of town, and found a small establishment to have tea, and then I escorted her back to her accommodation before 4:30. In that time, we had a goodly exchange of what we had been doing. I have already mentioned my own activities, so will omit those. Geraldine had been cordially received by her aunt and uncle. It being almost summer, there was but little chance of a teaching position immediately, though she had made inquiries and started to find out what might be possible. In the meanwhile, her uncle was able to employ her to aid in correspondence and bookkeeping in his supply house, which was a sort of general store, but which also made up and shipped orders to customers who might be some distance away. Geraldine's primary objection to her position was that he presumed that she was family, and given she lived under his roof, was only willing to pay a small allowance of the level of 10% of what he paid his other staff, albeit they were men. I have always felt that the labor should set the wage, not the gender of the worker, but I am in a minority in holding that opinion. I am certain. We were already, as I have said, rather fond of each other, and without a formal proposal from either of us found that we were both willing to talk of how we might succeed together. At the moment, I did not have a clear idea how far my salary would go to cover the expenses of living as a married couple. Geraldine was rather unhappy that she would not, in her present circumstances, be able to contribute very much to our prospective household. During our conversation, I asked if she got to meet other merchants and business persons. The answer was that, as she generally worked at the main counter, she would quite often see customers and occasionally be introduced. I urged her to learn as much as she could about the businesses and persons running them, as it was quite likely that bookkeeping and correspondence were needed elsewhere. Moreover, my experience was that most people were not very good at keeping good records, and many found correspondence tedious. Geraldine had a fine hand, as I had only observed the previous evening, and she was quick-witted. This line of talk cheered Geraldine greatly. By the end of our walk, we had agreed we would say little of our plans, but learn as much as we could about our new land and its opportunities, with a general intention to marry, if it were feasible, at the end of the year. 46. As you may imagine, I would have liked to spend much more of my time with Geraldine, but in the next 6 months, that is, until the end of 1855, we had the occasion to be together less than a dozen times, and about half of those occasions at the house of her uncle and aunt, Rupert and Anna Ogilvy. I made sure to be a welcome guest by bringing a contribution to the meal. Montreal was becoming more cosmopolitan, and I was able to bring from time to time a bottle of sherry, some pastries, or some fruit or preserves. My conversation with Geraldine about employment sowed a fruitful seed. Rupert Ogilvy sold cloth among other goods, so a number of seamstresses and dressmakers were among his customers. Geraldine realized some of them spoke very little English. Their talents were with their needles. Geraldine spoke French, but discovered, as I had, that the local dialect needed some training of the ear. However, by dint of saying she wanted to inquire about a dress or shawl or whatever, she was able to meet and talk with these industrious ladies. Her idea was at once simple but brilliant. Geraldine knew that she would lose employment once she married me. This, she felt, was not desirable, so she proposed that she could keep books and write up the invoices and receipts for the women who sewed. At first, she used whatever ledger books and paper the women had, but soon recognized that she could, for a fee, offer to provide standardized order books and paper that could be used for letters, invoices, or receipts, and if requested could have the business name printed thereon. Remember, this is before carbon paper and rubber stamps came into general availability 2 decades later. She gradually evolved a fee to establish the minimum necessities for the bookkeeping and other duties, and a schedule of rates for ongoing work. For invoicing and receipts, she offered to carry out the work for a small percentage of the total actually received. This pleased her clients in an age when people sometimes made their living running up debts they had no intention of paying. Geraldine helped several of her clients by insisting she would only work for them if they required payment for materials such as cloth before garments were made, and if they offered a small discount for cash on delivery. My intended wife had a hard nose for business which I could not help but admire. A further benefit of Geraldine's enterprise was that it could in large measure be conducted outside of business hours, that is, in the evening and weekend. One might think that a clergyman's daughter would eschew working on a Sunday. She put me in my place by noting that Sunday was a parson's busiest workday. While there was some concern that Geraldine's uncle and aunt might disapprove of her scheme, Rupert was, in fact, pleased at her initiative and decided that he would increase her pay and furthermore allow her 2 afternoons a week to pursue her own enterprise. He seemed, in fact, intrigued that a young and inexperienced woman should have such courage and will to carry forward her plans. A consequence of Geraldine's independent business was that it did not have to cease when we married. Moreover, by the time she was with child with George and later Emily, she had acquired a woman partner, Lisette Tremblay, who was of roughly the same age as herself and married to a schoolteacher. Their childbearing fortunately did not overlap in a way to 47 threaten the business, and Geraldine's contribution to our household fortunes was such that she could cover the entirety of the ongoing expenditure, while I looked after capital outlays and built our savings. During this time, my work was as peripatetic as ever. Kiefer sent me thither and yon to investigate, check calculations, make recommendations, and sometimes, it seemed, to show the Grand Trunk flag. Nevertheless, I learned a great deal, and occasionally Geraldine was able to come with me if the circumstances allowed. With O'Reilly's death, we were unable to follow the trail of the missing materials, but losses stopped immediately. Several workers came forward to say they were glad they did not have to pay him to keep their job, and the efficiency of that crew actually improved. In O'Reilly's trunk, found in his hut, a bundle of bank and other notes was found. This was inventoried and, on approval of the sheriff, put in a bank account. The other belongings were itemized and stored. A search for family proved fruitless. Macassack turned out to have known O'Reilly from both being on the same Irish immigrant ship in 1832. I had thought Macassack to be a Scot, but was mistaken. In any event, O'Reilly was 8 years old, and Macassack 6 and the cholera took all the rest of their respective families. Both were taken in by French-Canadian farm families, and it seems O'Reilly was not well treated, which may explain his character. Macassack said he had to sleep in the barn and had to work from a young age, but the local priest insisted he learn how to read and write, and the family had been, though not generous, not unfair or cruel. Rumors got out, and no less than 3 women, 2 with children in tow, presented themselves as O'Reilly's wife. Joseph and others were kept busy finding out who they were, as no documentary evidence of marriage or paternity was provided, though 2 of the women were accompanied by other women who said they would swear to the marriages. It turned out all were residents of brothels, and well over a year after O'Reilly died, he was declared intestate and without heirs. Eventually, the money and his effects likely went to the crown under a skeet. I awoke as the express stopped and heard Grantham called. I eased my arm from under Amelia to renew the circulation and lay for a while on my side. The dreams of my early times in Canada seemed to float around the small compartment. It was strange how I remembered so many practicalities. Somehow my thoughts of Geraldine were of the house we purchased and repaired to our own needs, the business she ran, the early years with George. But also I seemed drawn most to remember my work of the time,